The emergency lighting flickered, casting eerie crimson shadows across the cramped interior of the diplomatic shuttle. Aaron Maxwell wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of engine grease in its place. It was the third system failure in as many hours, and the atmospheric regulators were threatening to join the rebellion. "Come on, you cantankerous piece of junk," he muttered, fingers dancing across the diagnostic panel. "Just hold together until we reach the transfer station." The shuttle shuddered, as if in direct defiance of his plea. Outside the viewport, the crystalline spires of the Theon Confederacy capital world gleamed beneath twin suns, their azure glow casting long shadows across the cratered landscape. It was beautiful, in a cold, alien way, like most things in this sector of space. Aaron had never planned to be here. Technicians like him were supposed to stay safely within Saul's protective embrace, maintaining the aging fleet that ferried diplomats and traders between Earth's colonies. But when the regular engineer had contracted Centaurian flu 2 days before this critical mission, Aaron had been the only qualified replacement. "Your proximity to Theon airspace has been acknowledged," a disembodied voice chimed through the comms. "Prepare for escort approach." Aaron glanced at the readouts. The shuttle's diplomatic credentials were broadcasting correctly, but something was wrong. According to protocol, they should be receiving docking instructions, not a military escort. "This is Earth Diplomatic Shuttle Hermes," he responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Requesting clarification on escort protocol. We're expected at Central Hub Alpha for the Peace Summit." Silence stretched across the comms like a living thing. "Shuttle Hermes," the voice finally returned, its artificial neutrality somehow more menacing than outright hostility. "Your vessel has been reclassified. Follow escort trajectory precisely." Before Aaron could formulate a response, the comms went dead. Through the viewport, he watched 3 sleek, predatory craft materialize from stealth mode, their obsidian hulls absorbing rather than reflecting light. "Well," he breathed to the empty cabin, "this can't be good." With no options beyond compliance or suicide, Aaron guided the shuttle along the prescribed path. They bypassed the glittering central spires and commercial hubs, descending instead toward a massive structure that seemed to grow organically from the planet's surface, part cathedral, part fortress, with soaring arches and pulsing veins of blue energy running through its dark exterior. As they approached, a section of the structure dilated open, like a pupil adjusting to light. The escort vessels peeled away, their message clear: "You're on your own." The shuttle's autopilot engaged without Aaron's input, guiding the craft into a cavernous hangar where other vessels, mostly military by the look of them, stood in neat rows. When the engines powered down, the silence was absolute. Aaron took a deep breath, weighing his options. The diplomatic team he was supposed to be supporting was nowhere to be seen. Either they had never arrived, or they had been reclassified like his shuttle. Either way, he was alone on an alien world that had been at war with Earth's colonies for the better part of a decade. A heavy thunk against the hull made him jump. The airlock cycling company, smoothing down his rumpled technician's jumpsuit. Aaron decided that bravado was his only viable strategy. He might not be a diplomat, but he'd grown up in the hard-scrabble mining communities of Ceres, where a quick wit and unwavering eye contact had saved his skin more than once. The airlock hissed open, revealing 4 towering figures in glossy black exoplate armor. Their helmets concealed any facial features, but the energy staffs they carried made their intentions unmistakable. "I'd offer you coffee," Aaron said with a half-smile, "but the replicator's on the fritz. Another day in paradise." The guards didn't respond, merely gesturing with their staffs toward the exit. Aaron shrugged and stepped forward, trying to ignore the hammering of his heart against his ribs. They marched him through corridors that seemed to shift subtly as they passed, the walls pulsing with the same blue energy he'd observed from outside. It wasn't mechanical technology. At least, not as Aaron understood it. The Theon Confederacy had evolved along different technological pathways than humanity, integrating biological and quantum principles that Earth scientists were only beginning to theorize about. After several minutes, they arrived at a massive door that parted without visible command. Beyond lay a vast chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Bioluminescent glyphs crawled across the walls, shifting and reforming in patterns that strained the human eye. In the center of the room stood a dais, and upon it, a figure unlike the guards. She was tall, even for a Theon, with skin the deep cobalt blue that marked the warrior caste. Instead of exoplate, she wore what appeared to be living armor, scales that rippled with her movements, flowing like liquid metal over lean muscle. Her head was bare, revealing a smooth scalp etched with luminous markings that continued down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. Most striking were her eyes, pure white orbs without pupil or iris, yet somehow conveying an intensity that sent a chill down Aaron's spine. "Approach," she commanded, her voice resonant in a way that suggested it wasn't entirely produced by vocal cords. The guards prodded Aaron forward until he stood at the base of the dais, looking up at the alien warrior. Around the chamber's perimeter, he noticed other figures in various styles of dress, some in armor, like the guards, others in flowing robes that obscured their forms. All stood perfectly still, watching. "I am Valari, third ascendant of the Theon Confederacy, keeper of the 83rd seal," the warrior woman announced. "You stand in the Chamber of Reckoning, human." Aaron swallowed hard, but maintained his composure. "Aaron Maxwell, shuttle technician, Earth Collective. Pleasure to meet you, though I think there's been a mix-up. I'm just the guy who keeps the engines running." Valari descended the steps of the dais with fluid grace. Up close, he could see that what he had taken for tattoos were actually thin lines of the same bioluminescent energy that filled the chamber, pulsing beneath her skin in time with some inaudible rhythm. "There is no mix-up," she said, circling him slowly. "The diplomatic contingent never left Earth space. They were recalled when your colonial forces launched an assault on our outpost in the Proxima sector." Aaron blinked in confusion. "That's not possible. The ceasefire has been holding for months. That's why the summit was organized in the first place." "Deception," Valari hissed, the glow beneath her skin flaring briefly. "A human specialty." She completed her circle and stood before him, towering a full head above his not inconsiderable height. "Your vessel crossed into our sovereign territory, carrying technology consistent with surveillance equipment. You will provide access to your ship's systems and reveal the true purpose of your mission." Aaron felt a flicker of anger cutting through his fear. "My mission was to keep the life support functioning while the actual diplomats did their job. If someone's broken the ceasefire, it wasn't authorized by Earth Central, and the only surveillance equipment on my shuttle is the standard sensor array that every ship in space has been using since humans first left Earth." Valerie's expression didn't change, at least not in any way Aaron could interpret, but something in her stance shifted. "Kneel," she commanded, gesturing to the floor before her. The chamber fell so silent that Aaron could hear the soft hum of energy flowing through the walls. The guards tensed, their staffs humming to life. In that moment, something crystallized in Aaron's mind. He was probably going to die here, on this alien world, far from home, but he would not die on his knees, begging for mercy from someone who had already decided his guilt. He smiled. Not the nervous, conciliatory smile of a man trying to placate a superior force, but the genuine, slightly crooked grin that had been his signature since childhood. "No," he said simply. A ripple seemed to pass through the assembled observers. One of the guards took a half-step forward before Valari raised a hand to halt them. "You refuse the gesture of submission?" she asked, her tone suggesting she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. I do, Aaron replied, meeting her pupilless gaze. Where I come from. Kneeling is for prayer or proposing marriage, neither of which seems appropriate right now. He expected anger, perhaps immediate execution. What he didn't expect was for Valeri to tilt her head slightly, as if reassessing a puzzle whose pieces had suddenly rearranged themselves. Interesting, she said after a long pause. Follow. Without waiting for a response, she turned and strode toward a previously invisible doorway that materialized in the chamber wall. The guards moved to flank Aaron, clearly expecting him to resist or attempt escape, with a shrug that he hoped conveyed more nonchalance than he felt. Aaron followed the alien warrior through the opening and into a corridor unlike those they had traversed earlier. Here, the walls didn't merely glow, but seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with subtle movements. The floor beneath his feet felt almost soft, as if he were walking on living tissue rather than manufactured material. Not to be rude, he ventured after several minutes of silent walking. But where exactly are we going? If this is the scenic route to the execution chamber, I appreciate the consideration, but you are not being executed, Valeri interrupted without breaking stride. Yet, well, that's comforting. They passed several junctions where robed figures paused in their activities to watch them pass. Unlike Valeri, these Theons had varied skin tones, some the same cobalt blue, others ranging from pale aquamarine to deep indigo. Their eyes, however, were uniformly white and unsettling. Eventually, they reached another chamber, smaller than the first but no less impressive. Here, the bioluminescent patterns were concentrated in a circular design on the floor, pulsing with greater intensity than those in the corridors. In the center of the circle stood what appeared to be a console, though it bore no screens or obvious controls, just a smooth surface that rippled like disturbed water. Approach the resonance core, Valeri instructed, gesturing toward the console. Aaron hesitated. What is it? It is the voice of our collective consciousness, a new voice answered. Aaron turned to see one of the robed figures entering the chamber. This Theon was smaller than Valeri, with skin so pale it was almost white, and markings that formed more complex patterns than the warriors. I am Bari, interpreter of the 7th echelon, the newcomer said. Their voice was softer than Valeri's, with harmonics that suggested they might be what humans would consider female, though Aaron knew better than to make assumptions about alien gender. The resonance core will read your intentions, Bari continued, approaching the console with reverent steps. It will determine if you speak truth about your mission. Aaron looked between the two aliens, weighing his options. And if I refuse? Then execution becomes the only logical course, Valerie stated flatly. Right. When you put it that way. Aaron stepped cautiously into the circle of light. Just to be clear, this won't, I don't know, melt my brain or anything, will it? Barry made a sound that might have been a laugh. The core does not destroy. It illuminates. That's not actually reassuring, Aaron muttered, but he continued forward until he stood before the rippling console. Place your hands upon the surface, Bari instructed. Taking a deep breath, Aaron lowered his palms onto what looked like liquid, but felt like warm glass. Immediately, the blue light surged up his arms, tracing the paths of his veins with cold fire. He gasped, instinctively trying to pull away, but his hands seemed fused to the surface. The light spread rapidly, enveloping his entire body in a cocoon of pulsing energy. In his mind, images flashed with disorienting speed. The mining colony where he'd grown up, the engineering academy on Mars, his first assignment aboard an interplanetary freighter, the rushed briefing before boarding the diplomatic shuttle. Interspersed were questions that weren't words, so much as concepts, thrust directly into his consciousness. Purpose, truth, threat? Aaron didn't know how to respond except to think as clearly as possible about his actual mission and his confusion about the alleged attack on the Theon outpost. After what seemed like hours but might have been seconds, the light receded, and Aaron found himself able to remove his hands from the console. He staggered backward, his legs suddenly weak. Valari caught his arm, her grip firm but not painful. "The Corps has rendered judgment," she announced, looking to Bari for confirmation. The robed interpreter was staring at the console, which now displayed swirling patterns that clearly meant something to the Theons, but were incomprehensible to Aaron. "He speaks truth about his assigned role," Bari said slowly. "But there is more. The Corps detects anomalies." Valerie's grip tightened. "Explain." "Not anomalies of deception," Bari clarified, tracing a pattern in the air that was mirrored by the console's display. "Anomalies of perception. This human sees differently." "Different how?" Valerie demanded. Bari turned their white eyes to Aaron. "You questioned authority. You refused submission even facing death. This is not typical human diplomatic behavior, according to our records." Aaron managed a weak laugh. "That's because I'm not a diplomat. I'm a technician from the outer colonies. We tend to have issues with authority." "This explains the anomaly," Bari said to Valeri. "He represents a faction not aligned with Earth Central's diplomatic corps." "Wait, that's not—" Aaron began, but Valeri was already nodding. "Then we have intercepted an unauthorized agent," she concluded. "This could be valuable." "I'm not an agent of anything except maybe the Engineers Guild. And they barely remember I exist," Aaron protested. "Look, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. If someone attacked your outpost, it wasn't authorized by Earth Central. The whole point of the diplomatic mission was to strengthen the ceasefire." Valari and Barry exchanged looks that Aaron couldn't interpret. Finally, Valari spoke. "The Corps does not detect intentional deception, but your perception may be limited. You will be housed in appropriate quarters while we investigate further." Aaron sighed. "Let me guess. Appropriate quarters being a cell?" "A chamber suited to human physiological needs," Bari corrected. "With restrictions on movement. Yes." "A cell," Aaron confirmed, but he was too exhausted to argue further. The interaction with the Corps had left him drained in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "Lead the way." The chamber suited to human physiological needs turned out to be better than Aaron had expected. While not luxurious, it contained a bed-like platform that adjusted to his body contours, a sanitation alcove that figured out its function with minimal, embarrassing experimentation, and a food dispenser that produced bland but edible nutrition. There were no windows, but one wall displayed what appeared to be a real-time view of the planet's surface, currently showing the twin suns setting behind crystalline mountains, casting long shadows across an alien landscape. Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of his situation. Hours ago, he had been a simple technician on a routine assignment. Now he was a prisoner, or guest, as Barry had insisted, on an alien world, possibly on the brink of renewed interstellar war. The door, or what functioned as one, dilated open without warning. Aaron tensed, half expecting guards. But it was Valeri who entered. She had shed her living armor for a close-fitting tunic that did nothing to diminish her imposing presence. "Your shuttle has been examined," she stated without preamble. "No surveillance technology beyond standard operations was found." "As I told you," Aaron replied, too tired for sarcasm. Valari inclined her head in what might have been acknowledgement. "However, the attack on our outpost is confirmed. 17 Theon lives were extinguished." Aaron felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "I'm sorry for your losses, but I still don't believe Earth Central would authorize such an attack during peace negotiations." "Your belief is irrelevant to facts," Valeri said. But there was less hostility in her tone than before. She paced the small room, her movements fluid despite her size. "Yet the Corps indicates you speak truth as you understand it." Because it is the truth, Aaron insisted, standing to face her. Listen, I may just be a technician, but even I know that neither side can afford to restart this war. Too many lives have been lost already. Valari stopped pacing and fixed him with her unsettling gaze. Why did you refuse to kneel? The question caught Aaron off guard. What? In the Chamber of Reckoning, you were surrounded by superior force. Compliance would have been logical for self-preservation, yet you refused. Why? Aaron considered his answer carefully. Something told him this question was more important than it appeared. Because it would have been a lie, he said finally. Kneeling would have meant accepting guilt for something I didn't do, acknowledging an authority I don't recognize, and surrendering my dignity when it's one of the few things I had left in that moment. Even at the cost of your life. Some things are worth dying for, Aaron said with a shrug. Though I'll admit, I prefer living when possible. For the first time, Valerie's expression changed subtly, a slight easing of the severe lines around her mouth that might, on a human, have preceded a smile. You will attend the High Council session tomorrow, she announced. They wish to question you directly about Earth's intentions. Aaron's eyebrows shot up. Me? I'm the least qualified person to speak for Earth. I can barely speak for myself most days. Perhaps that is precisely why you were chosen, Valerie said cryptically. Before Aaron could ask what she meant, she turned to leave. At the threshold, she paused. Rest. You will need your strength. With that enigmatic warning, she was gone, the door sealing seamlessly behind her. Aaron collapsed back onto the bed, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. Something wasn't adding up. If Earth forces had truly attacked a Theon outpost, why bring him before the High Council? He was nobody, a replacement technician with no political connections or diplomatic training. Unless they believed he knew something he didn't. Or perhaps they thought his unauthorized agent status gave him value as a bargaining chip. Either way, Aaron had the distinct feeling he was being drawn into a game whose rules he didn't understand, with stakes higher than he could imagine. With no better options, he stretched out on the conforming bed and closed his eyes, hoping that sleep might bring clarity. Instead, it brought dreams of white eyes watching him from the darkness and blue light crawling beneath his skin. Morning. If it was morning. Time felt slippery in the windowless chamber, brought Bari with a fresh tunic clearly designed for human proportions and a meal that almost resembled breakfast. The council convenes in one revolution, the interpreter informed him, watching with apparent fascination as Aaron ate. One revolution of what? Aaron asked between bites. Of our world around its axis, Bari clarified. What you would call one day. Aaron paused mid-chew. Wait, the council meets once every day? Then why? The council convenes in one rotation from now, Bari corrected patiently. You would measure it as approximately 3 of your Earth hours. Ah, Aaron nodded, returning to his food. That makes more sense. Bari continued to watch him with an intensity that would have been unnerving if Aaron hadn't already adapted somewhat to the Theon's direct stare. After a moment, they spoke again. You are not what we expected. Aaron laughed shortly. Yeah, I get that a lot. What exactly were you expecting? Bari's head tilted in a gesture that reminded Aaron of an inquisitive bird. Our records indicate that Earth diplomats are selected for conformity to authority structures and adherence to protocol. You display neither quality. That's because I'm not a diplomat, Aaron explained for what felt like the 100th time. I'm a technician. We're a cantankerous bunch by necessity. You try fixing a malfunctioning drive core while following proper protocol every step of the way. This explains your anomalous responses, Bari mused. Perhaps there is wisdom in sending one who thinks differently. Before Aaron could once again protest that no one had sent him in any diplomatic capacity, the door opened to admit Valeri. She had returned to her living armor, which seemed even more fluid and responsive than before, shifting subtly with each breath and movement. It is time, she announced. "The council awaits." Aaron quickly finished his meal and donned the provided tunic, which fit surprisingly well and was more comfortable than it looked. As they exited the chamber, he noted that the corridor outside was lined with guards, more than seemed necessary for one unarmed human. "Quite the escort," he remarked. "Afraid I'll make a break for it?" "The escort is not for you," Valeri replied without elaboration. They proceeded through a series of increasingly ornate corridors, each more imposing than the last. The bioluminescent patterns grew more complex, and Aaron noticed that the Theons they passed, mostly robed figures similar to Bari, displayed a wider variety of physical characteristics than he had previously observed. Some were tall and willowy, others compact and sturdy. Skin tones ranged across the blue spectrum, from nearly white to almost black, with varying patterns of luminous markings. Finally, they arrived at a massive door unlike any Aaron had seen before. Instead of the smooth, organic portals that seemed standard in the complex, this was an actual physical barrier, made of what appeared to be living crystal that hummed with barely contained energy. "The council chamber," Bari explained softly. "Few outsiders have ever entered." "Lucky me," Aaron muttered, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. Valeri stepped forward and placed her palm against the crystal. The door resonated with a deep tone that Aaron felt in his bones, rather than heard with his ears. Slowly, the crystal became translucent, then transparent, then simply ceased to exist, or perhaps shifted to another state of matter that Aaron's human senses couldn't perceive. Beyond lay a circular chamber vast enough that its ceiling was lost in shadow. Around the circumference rose tier upon tier of seating, occupied by Theons in varied attire that presumably denoted different ranks or functions. In the center was a raised platform similar to the one in the Chamber of Reckoning, but larger and glowing with patterns so complex they made Aaron's eyes water. Valeri led the way toward the platform, the guards forming a perimeter around them. Aaron was acutely aware of hundreds of white eyes tracking their progress. As they reached the platform, Aaron noticed 5 figures seated on what could only be described as thrones, positioned at equidistant points around the platform's edge. These Theons wore neither armor nor robes, but were draped in what appeared to be living light, filaments of pure energy that shifted and flowed around their bodies. "The High Council," Bari whispered, stopping at the platform's base. Valeri continued forward, gesturing for Aaron to follow. When they reached the center, she dropped to one knee in a fluid motion, bowing her head. "Rise, Valeri, Third Ascendant," intoned one of the council members. A Theon, with midnight blue skin, and markings so bright they were almost painful to look at directly. "Present the human." Valeri stood and stepped aside, leaving Aaron exposed to the full attention of the council. He resisted the urge to shuffle his feet or fidget with his tunic. "High Ones, I present Aaron Maxwell of Earth," Valeri announced formally. "As commanded, he has been brought before you for questioning regarding the breach of the ceasefire agreement." The Midnight Blue Counselor leaned forward slightly. "Human, you claim ignorance of the attack on our outpost?" Aaron cleared his throat. "I don't just claim it. It's the truth. I was assigned to maintain the diplomatic shuttle systems for the Peace Summit. That's all. If Earth forces attacked your outpost, it was without the knowledge or authorization of Earth Central, at least as far as I know." A murmur rippled through the assembled Theons. Another counselor, this one with pale aquamarine skin, raised a hand for silence. "The Resonance Corps has verified that you believe what you say," they acknowledged. "However, belief does not alter reality. Our outpost was attacked by vessels bearing Earth collective identification." "Then, someone's using false identification," Aaron suggested. "Or there's been a terrible mistake. Or," he hesitated, a new possibility occurring to him. "Or someone wants to sabotage the peace process." A third counselor, whose skin was such a deep blue it bordered on violet, made a gesture that caused the platform beneath Aaron's feet to shift. Patterns of light swirled up around him, forming three-dimensional images in the air, what appeared to be tactical displays showing the attack on the Theon outpost. Aaron studied the images carefully. The attacking vessels were indeed marked with Earth Collective insignia, but something about their configuration struck him as odd. "Those aren't standard Earth military vessels," he said, pointing to a detail in the holographic display. "The drive configuration is wrong. Earth ships use a triple array pattern for stability. These have a dual configuration, more power, but less control." The Midnight Blue Counselor exchanged glances with their colleagues. "Explain the significance of this observation." "It means these aren't Earth Central ships," Aaron said with growing certainty. "They might be Colonial Defense Force vessels. Some of the outer colonies maintain independent military capabilities. Or they could be completely fake. Either way, they don't represent Earth's official position." "If what you say is true," the Aquamarine Counselor said slowly, "then who would benefit from disrupting the peace process?" Aaron spread his hands. "I'm just a technician, not a politician. But in my experience, there are always those who profit from conflict. Weapons manufacturers, mercenary groups, politicians who rise to power on promises of security. Take your pick." The Violet Counselor made another gesture, and the holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be communications logs. "We intercepted transmissions from these vessels to a command center on Earth's moon. Explain this." Aaron frowned, studying the data. "I can't, except to say that Earth's moon houses dozens of different facilities, both military and civilian. Without knowing which specific location they were communicating with, it's impossible to draw conclusions." The fourth counselor, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Their skin was a soft blue-gray, their markings more subtle than their colleagues. "You speak with surprising technical knowledge for one who claims to be just a technician." "Being just a technician means understanding systems and how they connect," Aaron replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "It's my job to know how things work and how they can fail. Right now, what I'm seeing is a failure of communication and trust that could restart a war neither of our peoples can afford." A hush fell over the chamber at his blunt assessment. The fifth counselor, who had yet to speak, rose from their throne. Unlike the others, this Theon's skin was not a shade of blue, but a deep, iridescent black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their markings were silver rather than blue, tracing patterns more complex than any Aaron had seen before. "You refuse to kneel before the third ascendant," they said, their voice resonating with harmonics that made Aaron's teeth ache. "A gesture that would have cost you nothing, yet preserved the proper order of authority. Why?" Once again, Aaron found himself facing this unexpected question. He glanced at Valeri, who stood impassively at the platform's edge, then back to the black-skinned counselor. "With respect," he said carefully, "it would have cost me everything that matters. Where I come from, people kneel to acknowledge someone's absolute authority over them, their right to command obedience without question. I couldn't do that. Not when I was being accused of something I didn't do." "Even facing death?" the counselor pressed. "Even then," Aaron confirmed. "Some principles are worth dying for." The black-skinned counselor's markings flared briefly. "And what of your Earth Central? Would you kneel to them?" Aaron laughed before he could stop himself. "Definitely not. Half the reason I took assignments in deep space was to get as far from Earth Central's bureaucracy as possible." Another murmur swept through the chamber, louder this time. The Midnight Blue Counselor raised both hands for silence. "You claim to represent neither Earth Central, nor those who attacked our outpost," they summarized. "Yet you stand before us as the sole human voice in this conflict. What would you have us do, Aaron Maxwell?" The question hit Aaron like a physical blow. They were asking him, a shuttle technician with no diplomatic training or political authority, to advise them on interstellar relations. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh again, but the gravity of the situation sobered him quickly. "I would have you seek the truth before seeking vengeance," he said finally. "If Earth Central was responsible, hold them accountable through diplomatic channels. If it was someone else trying to sabotage the peace, find them and expose them. But don't throw away the chance for peace because of one attack, no matter how tragic." The 5 counselors exchanged looks, and Aaron had the distinct impression they were communicating in ways his human senses couldn't perceive. Finally, the black-skinned counselor spoke again. "Your words will be considered. For now, you will remain our guest while we investigate these matters further." They gestured to Valeri. "Third Ascendant, prepare the human for the communion." Valerie's posture stiffened slightly, the first sign of surprise or uncertainty Aaron had observed in her. "High One, is that wise? No human has undergone the communion in generations." "These are not ordinary circumstances," the counselor replied. "The communion will reveal deeper truths than the core can access." With that, the council members rose as one and departed through doorways that materialized in the chamber walls. The assembled Theons began to disperse as well, leaving Aaron standing on the platform with Valeri and Bari. "What's the communion?" Aaron asked, not entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Valerie's expression was unreadable. "A deeper joining with the collective consciousness than the core provides. It will allow the council to verify not just your conscious thoughts, but your unconscious perceptions and memories." "That sounds invasive," Aaron said carefully. "It is," Valeri confirmed. "But it may be the only way to prevent war." Aaron swallowed hard. "And what happens to me during this communion? If your mind is compatible, you will experience a temporary merging with selected representatives of our collective. In this case, likely myself as your primary contact." Valeri explained. "If your mind is not compatible." "Let me guess, brain melting?" "Not precisely," Bari interjected. "But the trauma could render you non-functional." "Great," Aaron muttered. "When do we start?" "The preparations require 1 full rotation," Valeri said. "You will be returned to your chamber to rest and prepare mentally." As they led him from the council chamber, Aaron found himself wishing, not for the first time, that he had called in sick the day they needed a replacement engineer for this mission. The next day, or what passed for it in the windowless depths of the Theon complex, found Aaron pacing his chamber, too restless to sit still. Sleep had eluded him, his mind racing with questions about the mysterious communion and what it might reveal, or cost him. When Valeri arrived, she was accompanied not by Bari, but by 2 robed figures whose markings identified them as belonging to yet another faction of Theon society. "These are the guides," Valeri explained. "They will prepare you for the communion." The guides approached Aaron with graceful movements, carrying what appeared to be ceremonial vessels filled with a luminous liquid, the same blue as the energy that pulsed throughout the complex. "You must be purified," one of them said, their voice melodic but firm. "Remove your garments." Aaron hesitated, looking to Valeri. "Is that really necessary?" "The preparation ritual requires direct contact with the connective medium," she explained, her tone surprisingly gentle. "I will depart if you require privacy." Something in her manner, a hint of respect that hadn't been present before, made Aaron reconsider his objection. "No, it's fine," he decided. "Just explain what's going to happen before you do it, all right?" The guides nodded in unison. As Aaron disrobed, they explained that the luminous liquid, called essence in their approximation of English, would create a temporary interface between his human nervous system and the Theon collective consciousness. "The essence will not harm you," one guide assured him, as they began to apply the cool liquid to his skin in intricate patterns. It seeks compatibility, not transformation. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, like being touched by water that had its own agenda, where the essence made contact. Aaron felt a subtle tingling, as if his skin was being gently electrified. As the guides worked, Valeri stood by the door, her back half turned in what Aaron realized was a gesture of courtesy. Despite the clinical nature of the procedure, he appreciated the consideration. "The third ascendant will be your primary link during the communion," a guide explained, as they traced essence across Aaron's forehead. "Her warrior training makes her mind most compatible with your own." Aaron glanced at Valeri's rigid posture. Lucky her. Once the essence had been applied in patterns that mirrored the markings on Valeri's skin, the guides provided a new garment, a simple robe made of a material that seemed to breathe with Aaron's own rhythm. "It is time," Valeri announced as the guides stepped back. They proceeded through corridors Aaron hadn't seen before, descending deeper into the complex. The walls here were raw crystal rather than the processed materials of the upper levels, and the bioluminescent patterns were more erratic, almost wild. Eventually, they reached a chamber unlike any Aaron had yet encountered. It was perfectly circular, with a domed ceiling that revealed not the sky but what appeared to be a direct view into space, stars and nebulae swirling in patterns that didn't match any stellar map Aaron recognized. In the center of the chamber stood a pool of the same luminous essence that now decorated Aaron's skin. Around it were arranged 7 crystalline chairs, or perhaps thrones was more accurate, given their elaborate design. 5 of the thrones were already occupied by the council members. The remaining 2 stood empty. "The communion chamber," Valeri said quietly. "Few outsiders have ever entered. None have participated in the ritual." "Until today," Aaron murmured, fighting the urge to turn and run. "So what happens now?" "We join," Valeri said simply. She stepped forward and began removing her armor, not the ceremonial disrobing Aaron had expected, but a deliberate dismissal of the living metal, which peeled away from her body and slithered off into the shadows at the chamber's edge. Beneath, she wore a simple garment, similar to Aaron's robe, with the same essence patterns visible on her blue skin, glowing with greater intensity than his own. "Take your place," the midnight blue counselor instructed, gesturing to one of the empty thrones. Aaron approached cautiously and seated himself. The crystal immediately conformed to his body, not unlike the bed in his chamber, but with a precision that suggested sentience. Across the pool, Valeri took the final throne. "The communion reveals truth beyond words," the black-skinned counselor intoned. "Let the barriers between minds dissolve that understanding may flow." At these words, the essence pool began to glow more intensely. Tendrils of luminous liquid rose into the air, twisting and coiling like living things. One tendril approached Aaron, hovering before his face. "Do not resist," Valeri called to him. "Accept the connection," forcing himself to remain still. Aaron watched as the tendril touched his forehead, where the guides had applied the essence. Immediately, a sensation like ice and fire combined shot through his nervous system. The chamber around him seemed to dissolve, replaced by a void filled with stars. He felt as if he were floating, disconnected from his physical body yet more intensely present than he had ever been. In this void, he was not alone. Presences surrounded him, consciousnesses that were alien yet somehow familiar. Closest, and most distinct, was a presence he somehow knew was Valeri, not the stern warrior he had met in physical space, but a complex tapestry of experiences, emotions, and thoughts. Without words, he understood that he was experiencing the communion, a direct connection to the Theon collective consciousness, filtered through Valeri's mind to make it comprehensible to his human perception. Memories not his own flowed through him. Valeri, as a child, her markings still developing, learning the warrior disciplines. Valeri, witnessing the start of the war with Earth, the first human attacks on Theon outposts. Valerie, losing comrades to human weapons, her grief and rage palpable. Valerie questioning the endless cycle of violence, a doubt she had never voiced aloud. In turn, he felt his own memories being gently examined. His childhood in the mining colonies, his father's death in an industrial accident, his determination to understand the systems that had failed, his training as an engineer, finding purpose in fixing what was broken, his assignment to the diplomatic mission, his confusion and fear upon being diverted to the Theon complex. Most intensely scrutinized was his refusal to kneel, a moment that had apparently resonated deeply with the Theons. In the communion, he felt their collective reaction, shock at his defiance, then a deeper surprise at recognizing a quality they valued but had not expected to find in a human, what they called integrity of self. Beyond Valerie's presence, he sensed the council members, ancient, complex minds that evaluated his thoughts and memories with a dispassionate clarity that was neither hostile nor particularly sympathetic. They were seeking patterns, connections, implications beyond what he himself understood. Gradually, Aaron became aware of a question forming in the collective consciousness, not in words, but in concepts that his mind translated. Who attacked the outpost, if not Earth Central? Aaron focused on the question, allowing his mind to consider possibilities he hadn't fully articulated before. Images formed in the void, colonial separatist movements he'd encountered in his travels, rumors of mercenary groups working for corporate interests that profited from the war, politicians on both sides who had built careers on military posturing. As he considered each possibility, he felt the collective consciousness evaluating, comparing his limited knowledge with their own intelligence. Connections formed that he couldn't have made alone, his partial information completing patterns in their understanding. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, not his own, but from the collective. A damaged ship recovered after the attack, markings partially obscured, but bearing a symbol Aaron recognized from his time in the outer colonies. Not Earth Central, but a private military contractor known for taking questionable assignments from the highest bidder. The realization rippled through the communion like a stone dropped in still water. Earth Central had not ordered the attack, but someone wanted both sides to believe they had. As this understanding crystallized, Aaron felt the connection beginning to fade. The starry void dissolved, and he found himself back in the physical chamber, slumped in the crystal throne, his body drenched in sweat, and the essence patterns on his skin glowing brightly. Across the pool, Valerie was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between respect and confusion. The council members were communing among themselves, their markings pulsing in complex sequences. "The communion is complete," the black-skinned counselor announced finally. "The human speaks truth. Earth Central did not order the attack." "The true perpetrators have been identified," the Midnight Blue counselor added. "The mercenary faction known to humans as Black Star operatives, working at the behest of interests that profit from continued conflict." Aaron struggled to sit upright, his limbs feeling as if they belonged to someone else. You saw that in my mind?" "We saw it in the conjunction between your knowledge and ours," the aquamarine counselor explained. "Neither alone was sufficient, but together, the pattern became clear." "What happens now?" Aaron asked, his voice hoarse. The black-skinned counselor rose from their throne. "Now we prevent a war. The evidence must be presented to both Earth Central and our own military echelon before hostilities escalate further. The human will assist in this," the Violet counselor declared. His unique perspective proved valuable in the communion. It may do so again in negotiations. Aaron wanted to protest that he was still just a technician, not a diplomat, but he was too exhausted to form the words. Instead, he simply nodded. As attendants helped him from the throne, he found Valerie at his side, supporting him with a strength that seemed effortless. "You did well," she said quietly, for his ears alone. Few humans could have withstood the communion without breaking. I feel like I've been taken apart and put back together wrong, Aaron admitted, leaning against her more heavily than he'd intended. The sensation will pass, she assured him. Rest now. Tomorrow, we begin the work of peace. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and preparation. The essence had left Aaron's system, but the experience of the communion had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His perceptions seemed sharper, his thoughts clearer, as if the connection to the Theon Collective had somehow optimized his own neural pathways. Valari visited his chamber daily, ostensibly to brief him on diplomatic protocols, but their conversations invariably wandered to more personal topics. The shared experience of the communion had created a bond between them that transcended their respective roles and species. Your people value individual autonomy above collective harmony, Valari observed during one such visit. Yet you yourself sought connection and understanding when faced with conflict. Aaron, who had been pacing the chamber, as was his habit, paused to consider this. I think humans are more complex than either of our societies give us credit for. We're fiercely individual, yes, but we also crave belonging. We want to be ourselves, but we don't want to be alone. Valari's markings pulsed thoughtfully. During the communion, I sensed a loneliness in you, a disconnection from your own kind. Occupational hazard of deep space assignments. Aaron shrugged, but they both knew it went deeper than that. What about you, in the communion? I felt your doubts about the war, about your role in it. Valari's posture stiffened slightly. Those thoughts were private. Not anymore, Aaron said gently. That's the thing about connections. They go both ways. After a moment, Valari's rigid stance softened. Yes, I have questioned. The endless cycle of attack and retaliation seems inefficient, wasteful of potential. Coming from a Theon warrior, this was tantamount to heresy, Aaron realized. That's why you didn't execute me when I refused to kneel, isn't it? You recognized something in my defiance that echoed your own doubts. Valari didn't answer directly, but the subtle shift in her markings told Aaron he had struck close to the truth. On the 7th day after the communion, Aaron was summoned to a chamber he hadn't seen before, a vast atrium where the ceiling opened directly to the sky, allowing the light of the twin suns to stream down upon a garden of crystalline vegetation that hummed with its own internal music. Waiting there were not only Valari and the council, but also a delegation from Earth. The diplomats who had originally been scheduled for the peace summit finally arrived after the confusion of the diverted shuttle had been resolved. Among them, Aaron was surprised to recognize a face from his academy days, Dr. Eleanor Chen, now apparently a senior diplomatic advisor. Aaron Maxwell, she greeted him with genuine warmth. Of all the people I expected to find negotiating interstellar peace, you were quite literally the last on the list. Aaron laughed, embracing his old mentor briefly. Believe me, Dr. Chen, no one is more surprised than I am. The Earth delegation had been fully briefed on the evidence uncovered during the communion, corroborated by their own intelligence once they knew where to look. Black Star operatives had been exposed, and their backers, a consortium of weapons manufacturers and security firms, were facing charges on Earth. We owe you a debt of gratitude, Dr. Chen told him, as they walked through the crystalline garden, the Theon and human delegations mingling cautiously around them. Your accidental diplomacy may have saved millions of lives. I just did what anyone would do, Aaron demurred. Tried to stay alive and figure out what was really going on. Not anyone, Dr. Chen corrected him. Most people would have broken under the pressure, or at least tried to tell the Theons what they wanted to hear. Your stubborn integrity turned out to be exactly what was needed. Ahead, Aaron could see Valari in conversation with the Earth ambassador, her posture less rigid than he had ever seen it, her gestures more fluid and expressive, as if sensing his attention. She looked up and met his gaze across the garden. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond they now shared, transcending their respective allegiances. "What happens now?" Aaron asked, tearing his eyes away from Valeri. Dr. Chen followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "Now, the real work begins. Peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of understanding, cooperation, respect. Building that will take time." "And where do I fit in?" Aaron wondered aloud. "I'm still just a technician, not a diplomat." "Are you?" Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "The Theons seem to think you're something more. They've specifically requested your participation in the ongoing negotiations as I believe the term translates roughly as bridge mind." Aaron blinked in surprise. "They want me to stay?" "If you're willing," Dr. Chen confirmed. "It seems your experience with the Communion has given you a unique perspective that both sides find valuable." Before Aaron could process this unexpected development, a familiar voice spoke from behind him. "Your people are discussing your future without consulting you," Bari observed, approaching with a grace that seemed to barely disturb the crystalline foliage. "How very human." Aaron turned with a smile. "Bari, I was wondering where you'd been hiding." "Preparing," the interpreter replied cryptically. They nodded respectfully to Dr. Chen before continuing. "The third ascendant wishes to speak with you privately, before the formal proceedings begin." With a puzzled glance at Dr. Chen, who merely smiled and made a shooing gesture, Aaron followed Barry through the garden to a secluded alcove where Valeri waited. She had exchanged her living armor for ceremonial attire that emphasized the luminous patterns of her markings, making her appear both regal and somehow more approachable. "Aaron Maxwell," she greeted him formally. "Your people have agreed to the peace terms." "That's good," Aaron ventured, uncertain why this required a private conversation. "It is a beginning," Valeri acknowledged. "But sustaining peace will require ongoing effort. The Council believes that those who have experienced the Communion are best suited to this work." "So I've heard," Aaron said. "Dr. Chen mentioned something about me being a bridge mind." Valerie's markings pulsed in what he now recognized as amusement. "An imprecise translation. The concept is more intimate than that implies." Something in her tone made Aaron's pulse quicken. "Intimate how, exactly?" "Those who have shared the Communion retain a connection," Valeri explained. "Not constant awareness, but a resonance, an ability to understand each other beyond words. The Council believes this connection between us could serve as a foundation for broader understanding between our peoples." Aaron considered this. The idea of maintaining a resonance with Valeri was not unpleasant. Quite the opposite. In fact, during the Communion, he had glimpsed depths to her that fascinated him, complexities behind the stern warrior facade. "And what do you believe?" he asked quietly. Valerie's white eyes held his gaze. "I believe that your refusal to kneel was the most important moment in our recent history. It forced us to see humans, not as a monolithic enemy, but as individuals capable of the same integrity we value in ourselves." She stepped closer, the patterns on her skin pulsing more rapidly. "I also believe that connections formed in crisis must be tested in peace to determine their true strength." Aaron felt a smile tugging at his lips. "Is that the warrior's way of saying we should get to know each other better?" "It is the warrior's way of recognizing a worthy counterpart," Valeri corrected. But there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. "The decision is yours. You may return to your previous life, or you may remain as liaison between our peoples." Aaron thought about the life that awaited him back in Earth space. Endless repair assignments, solitary quarters on long-haul vessels, the comfortable but ultimately hollow existence he had built for himself. Then he looked at Valeri, at the complex, challenging, utterly alien being who had somehow become the closest connection he had experienced in years. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've spent enough time fixing machines. Maybe it's time to try fixing something more important." Valerie's markings flared briefly, a sign of strong emotion. Aaron had learned. "Then it is decided. You will remain as Bridgemind." "As liaison," Aaron corrected with a grin. "Let's stick with terms both sides understand." As they walked back to join the delegations, Bari fell into step beside them. "The council was correct," the interpreter observed. "Your minds harmonize well despite your differences." "Or perhaps because of them," Aaron suggested. "Sometimes the most interesting connections are between opposites." Valerie made a sound that might have been a laugh, the first Aaron had heard from her. "You are not as opposite from us as you believe." Aaron Maxwell. The communion revealed that. Ahead, the diplomatic proceedings were beginning, the formal dance of interstellar politics that would hopefully lead to lasting peace. But here, in this moment between moments, Aaron felt something more immediate and perhaps more meaningful. The beginning of a connection that transcended species and space, built on that simple, defiant moment when an alien warrior woman had said, "Kneel," and he had smiled and said no.